like I said, this first. All right. Um, so anyway, so we're going to just kind of go through a few things, nuts and bolts with the conference, that sort of stuff, and then we'll do some more discussion, which I think will be interesting. Why is this not moving? There we go. All right. So what's our goal? What are we trying to do here? I mean, really, the primary goal is to develop an updated policy statement. Really, that's an extension of the Houston conference. Really focused on integrating training guidelines. And, so we're really looking at all the training levels, pre-doc, internship, and postdoctoral levels in our field. The Houston conference, it's been over a quarter century, so they're really overdue for some revision and taking a good look at these. And so as part of that, really our efforts are to expand the framework of competency-based training in neuropsychology. As you're probably aware, I mean, this has been a significant movement in professional training and in neuropsych and psychology for a while now. And so this, the Houston conference did not really emphasize that. And so now this is our opportunity to do that. And in particular, infuse it with, health justice, equity framework. So the idea is that it's going to prepare our trainees to function well in both the workforce today and moving into the future. And so that's a critical part of this. And a part of your charge is thinking about, like, how do we train the next generation the most effectively to be productive members of the profession and serve our patients and society. And then the other part of this, as you're probably well aware, is, looking at technological innovations. How do we apply that to maintain and develop our services, in healthcare and society at large? So those are two of the main components. It doesn't have to be exclusively that, but those are two very important parts of this. And then a secondary goal is to develop a consensus statement on ongoing development activities. And this is just a kind of a forward-looking document, but supporting education and training in our field that will advance the broader needs. So we've got a couple of primary and secondary goals there. Now within that, and as I had alluded to, we have three basic focus areas that we're working on the conference with. And so the first is competency-based training. That's kind of the crux of what we want to develop is a more explicitly competency-based training model for our field. And as I said, that infuses with equity, social justice, inclusion, diversity is a critical part of that, and then the technological advances. So if you want to think about it as kind of three areas, these areas, they're not like three separate areas. They are all interactive, but there are certainly kind of three main focus areas. So the objectives, when we get these slides, they'll be posted on the conference website, so you can look at these and click on the links. You don't have to write these down. Those objectives are detailed out. We're not going to spend a lot of time going through them at the moment, but we certainly want you to get familiar with those. This was developed by the Planning Commission, which predated the Steering Commission. This project actually began over a year ago, just with the Planning Commission. And so and even before then, it was being worked on by like Relevance 2050 and so on. So this has been many years in the making. And then we also I have a values statement, which is a definition of clinical neuropsychology, the impetus for the Minnesota conference, and our goals. So take a look at all that. You should be familiar with that. I mean, these are launch points. These aren't the final say on it. I mean, the delegates will have certainly a lot of input and can vote on these, but we created in consultation with the experts. The experts actually did most of the work on this, a value statement, and then a policy statement. And that lists the elements, the policy statement that incorporate, the important things for education and training. And then the consensus statement for the ongoing development activities, which I had mentioned before. So those are all in there. So you'll want to take a look at that. And all this stuff is going to be available to you on the conference website. as far as the policy statement goes, the Houston conference is a starting point for this, but what's produced from this conference is not constrained by the Houston conference format. I think it informs us, it helps us give us a starting point, but it does not in any way mean that that's what we have to do. And in fact, there's limitations to that. The policy statement is envisioned should be competency focused, because that's really where the whole field and like I said, most professional training is going. And then the infusion with the technology as well as the equity, social justice issues are going to be an important aspect of that. So those are things to be thinking about. And it's important because the goal of this is like, how do we make training better so it's relevant for our folks coming up through the training pipeline, who in turn then will be better neuropsychologists for the community and the increasingly diverse community we have in the United States and Canada. All right, the competencies. So it'll specify evidence-based competencies, of course, if you're familiar with those. So the knowledge, skills, and attitudes needed to be a competent neuropsychologist. And so that's also for the entry-level practice in clinical neuropsychology. So this is like, when you finish postdoc, you need to be able to do these things, okay? And the thought is that this is consistent with the contemporary, competency approaches that you've probably read about. And we want to be sure to be inclusive of populations that have traditionally been excluded from the evidence-based. So, you're probably, aware that, there's some big issues in research, not just in neuropsychology or psychology, but, the lack of participants from communities of color and that sort of stuff. So those are issues that we, as a profession, need to work on. So in terms of the policy statement, formulating, the policy statement is formulated a draft of a preamble related to our values as a profession, particularly equitable access to our services and training, and of course our science. Also making sure that there's a comprehensive understanding, consideration of these issues with diversity and social justice. And then there's also a definition, as I said, in there. The idea is also it fully integrates the evidence-based into the contemporary values. And so that in terms of that framework for what we call cultural neuropsychology, and then the intersections of the social and structural forces on clinical neuropsych. And so those are all factors that impact our patients and our field and our research participants. And then it creates an equitable process for inclusion of groups that have traditionally been excluded from our training, from our practice, and our research. So looking at racial, ethnic, socioeconomic variables, linguistic, and cultural factors. So it's a big lift, but it's important. So that's all in there, just to kind of give you a flavor for it. Just take some time and read it. And then in terms of the technology part of the policy statement, it incorporates, the equitable application of technological advances in education, assessment, research, and so on. You can read that. So, I mean, really looking at all the domains that inform professional neuropsychology. Okay, so that's a little bit of where we're going. Just want to acknowledge briefly all the people and all the organizations that have contributed to the initial planning. And this is just a list of all the Planning Commission members. Now, the Planning Commission was made up of members from all the different neuropsychological associations. I believe there are 17 or 18 different groups that participated in planning this, and you can see the organizations and who was represented from each group in terms of planning and putting this conference together. Encourage you to take time to look at that, just to acknowledge their work. The Planning Commission actually was divided into 3 subcommittees that handled different tasks. So the first was the Delegate Selection Committee, which is the one you are most familiar with as delegates, because this is who you interacted with when you applied and everything. And Tony Stringer and Veronica Egger, were the chairs of that. The Planning, Fundraising, Logistics Committee, which is the people who did all the hard work in terms of, securing contracts with the venues and, all those logistical sort of arrangements. Amanda Gooding and Michelle Adore have worked very hard on that and continue to work on that. That will be an effort that will continue. And then the Program Planning Commission, which basically laid out the initial structure and kind of developed, plans for how many, delegates there were, expert panelists there were, steering committee members. That was chaired by me and Amy Jack. And then, as Suzanne said, she is the treasurer, and the fiduciary agent is the Asian Neuropsychological Association, and Michelle is the treasurer for that. Suzanne, I don't know if you want to just take 1 second and explain what that is and how that works, just so people know.
Sure.
We did it
yeah, fiduciary agent is essentially what we're doing is they are the stewards of the monies raised to sponsor this conference. So rather than establishing our own sort of organization with bylaws and things like that, we are essentially, serving under the umbrella of the Asian Neuropsychological Association. So our, obviously our finances are separate from them, but we're sort of under their umbrella. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, cool. So that's been going actually quite well, I think. So anyway, so that's some of the structure there. The steering committee, as I mentioned, is comprised of the presidents or their designates from the two major boards, ABCN and ABN, and the postdoc like ABCN, and then AITSN. And you'll notice that there's also 3 other members who are at large, called at large steering committee members, who are appointed by the Cultural Neuropsychology Council. And that was Tony Stringer and Veronica and Annie. And then the rest of us, Tom was ABN, I'm absent. Kathleen is ABCN, and Stephen is, Suzanne designated him representing AITSN because she is the treasurer, and the treasurer ex officio member, she can't vote. So that's the representation. And so what we tried to do is, again, in the spirit of having a diverse representation across the disciplines and across different groups, this is how we constructed it. And there's 7 members, so we have an odd number in case there's ever an issue we have to like hash out. Although I will say that thus far, everything has been decided by consensus, and there hasn't, like we've just talked things through. So it's been a good group, and the steering committee is responsible for just the overall success of the conference, so the structure and everything like that, and will be an active part of the whole thing. The expert panelists, their role is actually so there's actually several parts: the facilitating discussion, providing expertise in these different areas, different things like that. And so we have 12 expert panelists, and we broke them up based on those 3 groups that I talked about earlier. So we have a competencies group, an equity, justice and inclusion, diversity group, and then the technology group. And as Russ said, he's a member of the expert panel from the technology group. And you can see the other folks here. These are all, highly qualified, experienced members of our profession in their various areas. And so we've been working closely with them to pull all the material together. The expert panelists are really responsible for the, if you will, the content of the conference and working through the details and everything like that. We will also have a parliamentarian for like the group discussions, just to keep things fair, equitable, and allowing everybody a voice and following procedures, getting seconds for votes, that sort of thing. Now, here's a list of the delegates. This is everybody who's part of the delegate panel. Again, I'm not going to list everybody's name. I'm sure you know many of the folks here. Without going into a lot of detail, the selection process, it was really detailed, and they took a lot of time and a lot of care to really get a diverse representation from our field, not only diverse in terms of, obvious thing, like socioeconomic status and racial, ethnic makeup, level of training, geography, like as many different areas of representation as possible. And all these folks like you are involved in training. That was a critical part that we needed everybody to be involved in. So that's the delegates. And then we have a couple of observers, 3 observers who aren't voting members. They're paying their own way, but they might, they want to kind of learn from us, and also they probably have expertise to contribute. So they will be there. We'll have somebody from the APA Education Directorate, somebody from APIC, and somebody from the British Psychological Society, because they have been doing similar things in Britain and are continuing to do that. So we think we can learn from each other with that. And then the last big group is the volunteers. And these are folks who are almost all local to Minneapolis. I've been leading the effort to coordinate and get these folks. So we have faculty and trainee volunteers. The trainee volunteers are mostly postdocs, a couple of intern level folks, and we could have more. We may have more. The university, as part of its in kind, is also letting us use our psychometrists, who are, I'll just say, not that I'm biased, outstanding. So we will have some folks there. And then in the lower left-hand corner, you see the administrative assistant. Her name is Natalie Niskanen, and she's actually my education coordinator for our postdoc, and she's awesome. She's an ex-tech. The steering committee calls her the wizard because she just does amazing things, and I can't speak highly enough for her. She is an integral part of the success of this. She has coordinated so many things. I can't, it's all behind the scenes stuff. So when you see Natalie, thank her for all of her hard work, because it's just been above and beyond. So these are all volunteers. No one is getting paid by us to do this. We're not, we'll feed them when they're here. But they are doing this for the experience and to help the profession out. Their main role, for the most part, will be scribes. We may have some other duties, but just like in Houston 1, we need an accurate transcription of everything that's going on. So you will see them around in the sessions. And here's our sponsors. And I'm not going to go through and list them. You can see them there. You probably recognize many of them. And I also just want to shout out to all the individual donors who have made a substantial difference. And so I don't know the exact dollar amount, but we have over $8,000 in individual donations, as well as the organizational donations. So I don't know, Suzanne, do you want to say anything else to that? But
yeah, about 10% of the money raised was from individuals, which is really, really impressive given the size and scope of this conference and what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So this couldn't be possible without all of these contributions, and the major and not so major neuropsychological organizations really put up good funding. So and everybody contributed to the extent that they could. So you see some big names like AACN, you see some small names like the New York Neuropsych Group, the Asian Neuropsych Society, which couldn't contribute as much dollar-wise, but as a percent of their budget, certainly contributed. And then the University of Minnesota they basically did all the in-kind donations. So they're supporting a lot of the infrastructure, IT, the rooms, all those types of things. So it's essentially the same role that the University of Houston played in, the Houston conference, so which is why it's called the Minnesota conference. But I really want to shout out to all these organizations, because it's really a group effort to pull this off, because this is not a cheap affair we're doing. All right. So the conference structure, so the schedule is almost completely worked out, and we will be sharing that with you as soon as it's finalized. I think we sent you a draft of it just to give you a flair for how it's going to run. There are going to be we've divided everybody into 4 work groups. Everybody here is part of work group D. It was not, and it doesn't mean like you're any different, like than A or B or C. It's just like what we call them. And So each of the work groups will have a lead and an associate lead who will basically help be kind of an intermediary between the experts and the delegates, kind of help facilitate things. We'll have 2 scribes and 1 volunteer faculty per session who are responsible for making sure everything is accurately transcribed. We're doing, it's the whole inter-rater reliability thing. We want to make sure it's all accurate. So we have 3 sets of eyes on this. There'll be 2 expert panelists, a steering committee member. It might be 2, but I think most sessions will just have 1, and then 12 additional delegates. And so a big part of this will be, these breakout sessions where the groups are working in smaller groups to hash out different issues and of course record it. So that's just a flair for the conference structure. Obviously there's things we can do and we were asking you to do to prepare. Certainly reviewing the Houston conference guidelines is critical, so we know where we're starting from. You should be getting various articles from the expert panelists. Take a look at our website, particularly the conference objectives. That is really important to know. And then Brad Roper did a nice podcast on Nav Neuro, and that would be something I'd encourage everybody to listen to. It's really good and it really gives you some good context. All right, just a couple other nuts and bolts things. Accommodations. So your rooms have been reserved. Everybody has a room. You don't have to call. You don't have to do anything. That is done. All you have to do is show up. So we're including the links for the graduate hotel, both their formal link, and then Natalie and I went and took pictures of the venue so you can see just our photos. So you can see where it is. The cool part is it's in a nice setting. It's right on campus. And Russ, in answer to your question from last time, the Starbucks is in the graduate. So that's really good news for you Starbucks fans. There's a back door. You don't even have to go outside if it's raining. So we're set there. It's near everything. And it's a nice facility. So I'd encourage you, take a look. And all of this is on our conference website if you want to get a feel for it. Your transportation will be reimbursed, including flights. We asked people to make their flight arrangements. Those should already be done. We did ask everybody to, try and schedule flights if possible after 3 p.m. on Friday. Hopefully everybody was able to do that. And, to get to and from the graduate hotel, there are the usual options, cabs and Lyft and whatnot. But there is light rail that literally goes from the airport to the hotel. And the link for that is there. There is one transfer, but it's super easy. It's a very nice, easy to use light rail system. So we have that. So that information will all be on the website. And Suzanne, one thing that just occurred to me is we should put a link to the light rail on the conference website to make it easier for people.
That sounds like a plan.
Can you ping me just so I don't forget to do that?
You got it.
Cool. All right. Meals. We will have some meals. So there'll be a reception at 6 o'clock on Sunday. So please get there. And there'll be appetizers. It's in the Alumni Center, which is like right next to the hotel. Monday after the conference, we're going to have a group dinner at the it's a restaurant within the student union. It's pretty good. We're also going to do a group photograph. We have a professional photographer to get pictures of the whole group and various subgroups, and because there really aren't a lot of pictures from Houston 1, and it's like, this is history, and obviously our work will be documented, but I think the people should be documented. The people are contributing so much as well. So we'll be doing that after the main work on Monday. Breakfast and lunch will be provided for everybody Monday through Thursday, breakfast on Friday. There'll be per diem. You'll get per diem for the other meals. There'll also be an option for takeout in lieu of attending the group dinner if you're feeling uncomfortable, in terms of COVID and those sort of things. So we want to give people options for that. Daily goals are in progress. Stand by. We will be getting those to you before the conference, so you're aware of those. Some other housekeeping things, just real quick. I know we're getting a little low on time. I think the disclosure and conflict of interest policy that's been completed by everybody. Code of conduct. Please complete if you haven't done that. and then the COVID-19 policy, which we need the attestation forms and the consent and the vaccination. So please do that. To be honest, it's still a living document. We are closely monitoring CDC as well as state, local, and university guidelines, and we honestly will make changes if we need to. But we're going on the best science we can. So please be patient with that, and please be considerate of everybody who's attending the conference. And if you do get sick, part of the COVID policy is that, but this resource will be, when it's posted, this resource will be there on the website. We'll also have an orientation packet. It'll be a virtual packet, but these are resources for testing and treatment sites near the hotel. And there's an urgent care center just a couple of blocks away. There's a walk-in clinic a little farther away. And then if it's really bad, the emergency department at the University of Minnesota Med Center is literally like 2 blocks away. Let's hope no one needs that. All right. So there's your brief background. Before we go into our discussion questions, are there any questions just about kind of structural, procedural things, real quick? Not hearing any. All right, let's go on. So I'm going to turn this over to Suzanne, but I can keep screen sharing and pop up.
Yes, please, because I think that this is the part where it's on a timer, so I may need you to add things. Yep, there we go. So I think really we have essentially 5 questions for consideration and discussion, and they sort of go with the overall theme of the conference. And so I think the very first one that is important for delegates to consider is really what are the main issues that need to be addressed in the training guidelines? So what are the things that really need to be a focus of revision? And so I will sort of turn that over to you guys for some discussion. For this, I don't think it's, unless people get crazy, I'm not sure it's really necessary to raise hands or anything like that. But, we're kind of in the meat of it now. So if this is something you haven't considered, I think now's the time to do so. And I would also encourage you to think of it both in terms of maybe some affiliations with professional organizations you might be with, but also through your own experience and what your observations are of the field. We really are looking for diversity in responses. So if anyone has any thoughts, please feel free. Yeah, I knew this was too much to ask for a Friday afternoon.
Well, do you mean sort of beyond the primary goals that have already been outlined? So
I think, maybe more specifics, is there anything that you can sort of pinpoint and say, you know what, I feel like this in particular needs to be brought up at the conference?
I mean, from my perspective, it seems like the 3 main goals that we've got, the competency, the Jedi, with the image of, Monica and Jen Manley and Daryl Fuji just sort of doing some chops on somebody. That's why I love the term Jedi. And the technology seem to be a good way to go. Those are, really important topics that I'm really glad that we're finally addressing.
So just sort of those things that really are outdated and need to be updated. Rick, I saw you had sorry, I'm sorry, Tish, did I interrupt you?
You're good. No, just adding in terms for trainees and the training component, I think often what I'm seeing is then the trainees are more trained than the supervisors and the faculty. So it needs to be also the competencies of supervisors and the faculty providing the supervision. So I think it's the content of people that are already neuropsychologists as well as the trainees.
I think that's an excellent point, and maybe particularly with outside practica, So I know that can be an offender for sure.
Yeah. I mean, part of the thought process, it has actually been on like continuing education for professionals. And I think your comment, captures some of those issues there that I think are worthy of consideration as the conference goes on. Like how do we educate our professionals to do this well, and what does that mean for continuing education? So that's an excellent point.
Rick.
Yes, two ideas.
Mhm.
Actually, I wrote a paper in 1997, right before the Houston conference. It basically said that neuropsychologists need to be better trained in rehab issues.
Yes.
The rehab psych training guidelines came out in 1995. And basically there was many different things that we put in there related to cognitive rehab, knowledge about state voc rehab programs, disability determinations. I think the Houston conference, they put one big generic, you need to be aware of neuropsychology and its ecological applications or something. So I would say that rehab psych would be one. And then the second, I was glad to see that there's been some discussions of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And I think that a weakness in neuropsych is attitudes. We're very good in teaching knowledge and skills, but I don't think we do a real good job of educating our trainees about the personal experience of disability. And we published an article out here through the Emory, through one of your colleagues, on the representation of disability through art history. And I think maybe we could come up with some suggestions for different ways to use the humanities to educate trainees about different types of disabilities, whether it's books like The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, or movies, something like that. But that'd be something pretty easy to do that I would like to help out on.
Great, excellent. And I know Russ has made some comments in the chat session about, some of the neuropsychological intervention and rehab being part of the discussion on functional competency. So I think that that's excellent.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on this particular issue before we go to sort of the next ones?
Can I just piggyback on what Brick just said? Along with attitudes, I think one of the other three components that Sue in terms of diversity training has been talking about for a long time is awareness. So self-awareness is linked so tightly with the attitudes that we have. So that was another thought. And I'm glad that we're kind of in neuropsychology moving to places where we can kind of begin to explore inward as well as what we do, with our science and practice.
Excellent point.
I think we may come up with some additional ideas. I am guilty. I have not recently looked at the Houston guidelines, so I think reviewing that will be helpful too, to maybe generate some new thoughts.
Absolutely. And honestly, this is more just to stimulate your own thoughts in preparation for the conference more than anything else. I feel like some folks on sort of the steering committee have been saturated in it for a while, but this is new and exciting stuff. And I think that what everybody's most interested in are what the delegates have to say. So I think that that's kind of, this is sort of meant to be sort of a thought exercise about that. And again,
so in the technology piece, is that going to include anything about neuroimaging training?
That is a good question. I will defer to Dr. Bauer about that one, being on the technology committee. You're muted. Speaking of technology.
Oops.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my cup holder was out. The issue of neuroimaging is obviously something that our students need to know a fair amount about, but the question is achieving a sweet spot between, key knowledge that general practitioners and other folks need to know, as opposed to like the highly detailed in the weeds kinds of things. So I think we need to achieve a balance of practicum experiences that expose students to neuroimaging technologies in the context, for example, of medical review boards versus didactic training. So, we're going to have some general recommendations.
Okay, great.
I
don't remember if Houston touched on that or not.
It was mentioned. I think there was a single word.
That's what I thought. Yeah, there was like a sentence in there, but that's going to be.
And it was and something and neuroimaging.
Got it.
Nice.
I mean, there's so many imaging procedures now that didn't even exist back then. So I think it'll be worth educating, making sure trainees are familiar with the terms at least.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so, very much so.
Good.
So,
we go on?
yes, let's go on. Actually, why don't we do the next two together because they are sort of related, Doug?
All right, trying. There we go.
All right, so that one and then,
Right.
okay, so we kind of have a yin yang sort of question. I think the first is probably easier to answer. What barriers do you currently see in clinical neuropsychology specialty training? And what are sort of facilitating factors? So where are the barriers and where are the paths forward? And so I think the idea is to minimize these barriers and increase these facilitating factors. So I am very curious. I know for me right out of the gate, I think one of the major barriers is it's very hard for non-traditional students to, do any graduate program, much less one as time and labor intensive as clinical neuropsychology. So I think, right off the top of my head, being in training at sort of all levels, it's like, it really is something that many people cannot do. Financially, logistically, for whatever reason.
And related to that is actually awareness of the field, awareness of the opportunities
Yeah.
for those particular individuals. I mean, how many undergraduates hear of neuropsychology, especially from, people who are not as well-to-do as others, or have never been exposed to a neuropsychologist, right? So I think the kind of PR for the field is something we need to talk about as well.
That's important. Yep. I will say I was in graduate school in a neuropsychology program as a clinical psychology student, never having heard of neuropsychology before. And I'm not that old. I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old.
So this is Glenn here. Can
Mhm.
everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm going to start now doing my very best to represent my constituency, which is the international community. And I think INS decided to contribute in a substantial way to what's essentially an American conference, in part because of these key planks you all have developed that can have relevance, globally. And so what I resonate to here is this notion of if we can develop competency-based platforms, we may be able to move away from time-based. I mean, time is money, right? Why is it so expensive to train in the field? Because we've dictated a certain number of time-based metrics, like 2-year postdocs, et cetera, et cetera. So, and those same barriers may have relevance not only globally, but nationally in terms of issues of minoritized groups and the expense of training. So I really hope we put teeth into this idea that there may be many, many ways to gain competencies as specified, and think about how we might expedite getting to those competencies in a way that makes the title of clinical neuropsychologist more accessible.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback from that in terms of the immigrant community of being international, being an international individual as well, of the 2-year fellowship. And I've been on the other side of admissions and not being able to be supported for sponsorship or anything from the university. So there are different codes that how the programs can be labeled. So I think that looking at those barriers as well for access will be important. Because I think the facilitating factors are, we are recruiting and the trainees are wonderful. Like they want to know. I think that's the facilitating part of having lived through telemedicine and teleneuropsychology and the current racial and just epidemic. They want to know, they want to learn. So I think that's the facilitating factor is the students that are coming in really ready to learn and move forward.
And I see I'm not alone in noting that funding is a barrier.
funding is a huge barrier, and I think probably not a barrier we may
No.
solve in a week in Minnesota, but I think, sort of acknowledging the very large elephant in the room is vital.
Yeah, and we may be, I mean, some of us that are in institute, like our institution provides no funding for our fellowship program. We're on our own, as many are. But I think having that addressed, or at least acknowledged in this document, will be something we can use within our institutions. Not that it'll fly very far, but I think it's worth at least commenting on the elephant.
Yeah. And I really liked your point, Monroe, about expanding sort of avenues to achieve competency. Perhaps outside the traditional full-time 5-year graduate model, and really kind of looking at potentially other ways people could get their, competencies and still be a very good clinical neuropsychologist.
Yeah, and actually part of my comment there is we've actually hired a couple of folks that came through non-traditional paths.
Yep.
And they're terrific. And if you just look at the CV, it might not look fantastic, but once you understand what their experience has been, what they bring to the table, and how much knowledge they have that's not reflected in the CV alone, it's really been eye-opening and is really impressive. And I'm not sure how often those people are unfortunately excluded from academic positions as a result.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
these
Yeah.
are part of the discussions I think we need to have, is, reviewing for, board certification. Well, how flexible can we be? Are we being flexible enough, et cetera?
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
I'm mindful of time, so why don't we get to our last two in the few minutes that we have left. So again, I think honestly, let's see here, initiatives that, so, this again, where the rubber meets the road. We identify the barriers. What do we need to do to improve the climate of training? Where it is safe, it is equitable, and it is growth oriented, because I think that's what everybody would like to see. How do we specifically go about doing that? And, again, obviously, this is not a question that can be answered in 4 minutes, but something to be thinking about. Like, what are the specifics here? What is it that we need to be doing within our programs, within our practica, within our internships, within our fellowships?
Yeah, or maybe even before all that, like relating to the pipeline issue.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
How do we create a safe, equitable, and growth-oriented pipeline to even get in
Yeah.
graduate school? Yeah. So just think about that. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Monroe.
No, I was about to use the same term, pipeline. I think probably in all of our organizations, we've had these discussions, and we had a big discussion at Sports Neuropsych on the board about, we need more sports neuropsychologists. Well, my point was, we need more neuropsychologists first. And yet our organization, we're not really in a position to go out and, I guess we could do more talks at the high school level or college level or whatever, but that pipeline issue, you're right, we're not going to solve it in a week in Minnesota either.
No, but it's worth, I think, talking about and seeing where we go. But so anyway, so think about that. These are, like I said, most, Suzanne mentioned this as well. It's really things to think about between now and the conference, and
Yep.
this beginning.
And we've got one more for you to sort of food for thought. And then again, and I think that we can all easily, immediately things spring to mind. What major area knowledges of skill or attitude are not currently covered or covered sufficiently in most neuropsychology training programs? And folks have already brought up some things. So, the experience of disability, rehabilitation, neuroimaging, neuroanatomy, JEDI issues in every single aspect of neuropsychology. So not just the training, but in the actual normative data and the tests themselves. So those types of things. These are things that I think are going to be highly, highly relevant. Importance of advocacy. Yes, absolutely. I think, this is the fact that people don't know that neuropsychology exists is a big, basically plea for better advocacy on our part. So what can we add to people's well-being? What can we add to help?
Hmm.
Okay. Russ, apparently you have been nominated as the Jedi for our group. Your lightsaber is in the mail.
I think we need to change our abbreviation for
But my aim is so poor.
Jedi.
Thoughts about any of this in the very few last couple minutes that we have? Or, if not, think about it, write it down, and get ready to duke it out at the conference, because I think that a lot of people have different ideas. I think we all have the shared goal of trying to improve training. We all may have very different ideas of what's the best way to do that. So I think that I would encourage all of you to be considering this in the next 5 weeks, because we are 5 weeks away from this conference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. All of the delegates will be getting reading sets from each of the expert areas, things to, 4 or 5 articles to read to kind of get you up to speed on things that the expert panels think are, maybe important. But I want to just reinforce what Suzanne just said. It's really important that the delegates come with a vision and with ideas, rather than being responsive to what's thrown at them, to come with their own ideas and, really mix it up in discussion.
Yeah. I mean, you guys represent the field. And so we as a field are looking to you. No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure. Any other thoughts or questions before we sign off? I want to be respectful of time. No?
I think we're good.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure meeting all of you, and I am really looking forward to this conference.
Yeah, thank you again for taking the time to do this. We'll be getting this whole slide set posted on the website. And as Suzanne said, please think about this, mull it over the next 5 weeks, and come ready to have some great discussions, and we'll move the field ahead.
Yes,
So.
we will. Have a
All
good
right.
Friday, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.